Hello and welcome to my YouTube. This YouTube is remembering the year 1945. I was 1 year old, living with my mother in Harlingen, Texas, and my father was serving with the Hells Angel 303rd Bomb Group in England. There were two U.S. presidents in 1945. Franklin D. Roosevelt was president from January 1st to April 12th, 1945. And you can tell by this photograph that he was not a well man. Harry Truman became president when President Roosevelt died on April 12th. On January 26th, 19-year-old U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Audie Murphy is awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest medal in the United States military. Audie Murphy was the most decorated soldier in America during World War II. Years later, in 1955, there was a movie that I went to that I loved, To Hell and Back, which was the true life story of Audie Murphy, based upon his autobiography. On January 27th, the Soviet Red Army liberates the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp. On February 4th through the 11th, President Franklin Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin hold the Yalta Conference. At this conference, they determined what was going to happen to Germany and Europe after the war was over. On February 12th, a devastating tornado outbreak in Mississippi and Alabama kills 45 people and injures 427 others. On February 19th, the Battle of Iwo Jima begins. About 30,000 United States Marines land on Iwo Jima. On the 23rd, a group of United States Marines reached the top of Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. And a photographer, Joseph John Rosenthal, took this photograph, which won the Pulitzer Prize. This is probably, by many people, the most famous photograph taken in World War II. It is so famous that the Marine Memorial statue was built in Washington, D.C. I lived and worked in Washington for 7 years. I drove past this statue every day on my way to work in downtown Washington, D.C. On February 5th, in the United Kingdom, Princess Elizabeth, who would later become Queen Elizabeth, joins the Auxiliary Territorial Service as a truck driver / truck mechanic. No sitting around the palace for her, no siree. On March 29th, B-29 bombers attacked Tokyo, Japan with incendiary bombs, killing 100,000 citizens in the firebombing. It is the single most destructive conventional air attack of the entire war. On March 18th, 1,250 American bombers attacked Berlin. This gets personal for me. This is a screenshot of my dad's bomber group information, the Hells Angels 303rd Bomb Group. And in this book, they list all of their missions. I was looking through it, and sure enough, on March 18th, 1945, my dad's bomb group attacked Berlin. So they were part of the 1,250 planes. This tells me that in his group, 40 bombers took off. 2 of them had to turn back because of mechanical problems, and 2 of them were shot down. And this tells me that his bomb group was in the lead of that bombing mission. On April 1st, the Battle of Okinawa. The 10th United States Army lands on Okinawa. This island was very important because it's only about a little over 300 miles due south of Japan. So this was sort of the last stepping stone into Japan. During the Battle of Okinawa, the Japanese battleship Yamato, which was the world's largest battleship, it was sunk by U.S. Navy aircraft. This was quite a feat to sink the most powerful battleship in the world. On April 12th, Vice President Harry Truman becomes the 33rd President of the United States upon the unexpected death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He died while he was at the Little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia. This is a photograph of the hearse that is carrying his body to the train to return it to Washington, D.C. Quite a shock that here in the middle of the war, our president dies. On April 16th, the Battle of Berlin begins. This was the beginning of the end. Berlin was the final conquest, the final target. On April 18th, American war correspondent Ernie Pyle is killed by Japanese machine gun fire. Ernie Pyle was probably the most popular newspaperman reporting on the war. He was famous for his stories about the common soldier, and he was much beloved. It's kind of personal for me because Ernie Pyle grew up just about 30 miles from my hometown. And there is the Ernie Pyle Memorial Highway that was named in his honor, and I have traveled up and down that highway many, many times. On April 19th, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel opened on Broadway. Hard to imagine that in the midst of this horrible war, Broadway plays were still going on, and people were still going to the theater. On April 22nd, Adolf Hitler finally concedes that, quote, everything is lost. This is the very last photograph ever taken of Adolf Hitler. On April 25th, Elba Day, the United States and Soviet troops link up at the River Elba, cutting Germany in two. This was a big deal when these two armies finally met. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler takes his own life as the Red Army approaches the Fuhrer bunker in Berlin. The Fuhrer bunker was where Hitler was hiding deep underground. On May 4th, German surrenders at Lüneburg Heath. All German armed forces in northwest Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands surrender unconditionally to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the great British general. Here's a question. How many Americans died on the continental United States mainland during World War II? That's in the 50 states. Of course, Alaska and Hawaii were not states back then. How many Americans died on the American homeland? The answer? 6 Americans died on American soil. And here's the story. On May 5th, a Japanese fire balloon kills 6 people, Elsie Mitchell and her 5 children, near Bly, Oregon, when it explodes as they drag it from the woods. These are the only Americans killed by a Japanese attack on the American mainland during World War II. And this was considered to be retribution for the Doolittle raid early in the war. And it was young Japanese schoolgirls that sewed these balloons together. They were forced to. This is a memorial on the spot where that family was killed. On May 7th, General Alfred Jodl signs the unconditional German instrument of surrender at Reims, France, to end Germany's participation in the war. The surrender is effective on the next day, May 8th, at 23:01, which would be 11:01 p.m. in the evening. So May 8th. May 8th was Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, observed by the Western European powers as Nazi Germany surrenders, marking the end of World War II in Germany. On June 26th, the United Nations Charter is signed in San Francisco. On July 1st, Germany is divided between the Allied occupation forces. So there was a Soviet sector, a French, a British, and an American sector. On July 8th, President Harry Truman is informed that Japan will talk peace if it can retain the reign of the emperor. Apparently, this was very important to the Japanese people to protect their emperor. On July 16th, the Trinity test, the first successful test of an atomic bomb. This, of course, was secret. And even though this atomic bomb went off and a lot of people saw it, the government explained that it was just a munitions explosion. No explanation of what it really was. People wouldn't have understood anyway. Who knew what an atomic bomb was? Nobody. On July 24th, President Harry Truman secretly approves the order for atomic bombs to be used against Japan. So we've had the test. We now know we have a real working bomb, and he authorizes the military to use it. On July 26th, about a week later, the USS Indianapolis secretly delivers the atomic bomb to Tinian Island. Tinian Island was the island in the Pacific where the bombers were going to take off to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this ship carried the uranium and the parts for the bomb. Secret mission. On July 26th, the Potsdam Declaration demands Japan's unconditional surrender, but Article 12, permitting Japan to retain the reign of the emperor, has been deleted by President Truman. He scratched that part out. On July 28th, an American B-25 Mitchell bomber crashes into the Empire State Building, killing 14 people. This is where it came in, and this is a close-up of the damage. The Empire State Building. Of course, we all remember the World Trade Center. On July 28th, Japan ambiguously rejects the Potsdam Declaration. In other words, we gave them this declaration saying you need to surrender. They invoked something called mokusatsu, which means treat with silent contempt. In other words, they said nothing. They basically ignored us. This is July 28th, okay? On July 30th, the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis is hit and sunk by torpedoes from the Japanese submarine in the Philippine Seas. 890 sailors survived and jump into the sea and are adrift for up to 4 days. The Navy didn't know it was sunk for 4 days. Now, remember the movie Jaws? There was a character, Robert Shaw played him, and he was Quint. And there's a very famous scene where he talks about being one of these men on the USS Indianapolis that went into the ocean. So the horrible reality is 574 of those men died from shark attacks before help arrives. And in the movie Jaws, Quint talks about that experience based upon the true story of the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. 500 out of 800 died. On August 6th, the United States Boeing B-29 Superfortress Enola Gay, which was named after the pilot's mother, drops an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, resulting in between 90,000 and 146,000 deaths from a single bomb. This was an actual photograph. This building was left standing in ruins, and this is what it looks like today. It is a war memorial memorializing the bombing of Hiroshima. On August 7th, President Harry Truman announces the successful atomic bombing of Hiroshima while he is returning from the Potsdam Conference aboard the U.S. Navy heavy cruiser USS Augusta. So until he made this announcement, no one really knew what had happened in Hiroshima. They did not know that it was a single bomb that destroyed that entire city. I want to read you what President Truman said. 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima, an important Japanese army base. That bomb had more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. It had more than 2,000 times the blast power of the British Grand Slam, which is the largest bomb ever yet used in the history of warfare. The Japanese began this war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction to supplement the growing power of our armed forces. In their present form, these bombs are now in production, and even more powerful forms are in development. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe, the force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East. It was to spare the Japanese people from utter destruction that the ultimatum of July 26th was issued at Potsdam. Their leaders promptly rejected that ultimatum. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. And that was broadcast on August 7th. 2 days later, August 9th, the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, a United States B-29 drops an atomic bomb on Nagasaki, killing 286,218 people. An even bigger bomb. On August 10th, Japan offers to surrender to the Allies, quote, provided this does not prejudice the sovereignty of the emperor. So they were still trying to keep their emperor, who they considered a god. 2 days later, the Allies replied to the Japanese surrender offer by stating that the Emperor Hirohito will be subject to the authority of the Supreme Commander of the Allied forces. In other words, well, you can keep your emperor, but he will be under our orders and our control. He will not be running Japan. On August 14th, Emperor Hirohito accepts the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. He recorded his announcement of this, and that recording was secretly smuggled out of the Tokyo Imperial Palace. At 7 o'clock that evening in Washington, D.C., President Truman announces the Japanese surrender. The Japanese people hadn't even heard this yet. So this is on August 14th, that evening. Truman says they're going to surrender. The next day, on August 15th, Hirohito's surrender broadcast, the one that he secretly made in his palace and they smuggled out, his announcements of the unconditional surrender of Japan is broadcast on the radio a little after noon. This is probably the very first time an emperor of Japan has been heard by the common people. The Allies call this day Victory over Japan Day, VJ Day, August 15th. So August 15th, and the war is over. Allies call it VJ Day. And there's a very famous photograph taken on that day. In Times Square in New York, this sailor was walking up and down the street, kissing any and every woman he came across. It didn't matter if she was 15 or 20 or 30 or 50 or even an old 60-year-old. He was just kissing girls. It turns out 2 different photographers both caught him in the act of kissing this nurse. And years later, they actually tracked these 2 people down and found out who they were. At the time, they were just anonymous. But here are the 2 pictures taken simultaneously by 2 different photographers from slightly 2 different angles. Amazing. Times Square, New York, celebrating VJ Day. On September 2nd, World War II officially ends. The final official Japanese instrument of surrender is accepted by the Supreme Allied Commander, General Douglas MacArthur, and Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz for the United States. And these are actual photographs of the signing of the official surrender. On November 20th, the Nuremberg trials began. These are trials against 22 Nazis for war crimes of World War II. And these were started at the Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, Germany. On December 5th, Flight 19 of the United States Navy, these were Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bombers, and they all disappeared simultaneously on a training exercise from the Naval Air Station at Fort Lauderdale. So these planes are out over the ocean and they just disappear and they are never found. No one knows what happened to them. And where did they disappear? They disappeared in an area that became known as, wait for it, ta-da, the Bermuda Triangle. So this is the beginning of this mystery or this theory of a Bermuda Triangle doing strange things, planes and ships disappearing. Well, this really happened. This was the first one. On December 9th, after the war is all over, American General George S. Patton is involved in a car accident in Germany, which resulted in his death on December 21st. In the accident, he was totally paralyzed from the neck down. And he had a lung infection, which eventually killed him. And he told his wife and friends, quote, "This is a hell of a way for me to die." So on a happier note, who was born in 1945? I think you'll recognize most of these. Tom Selleck. Now this is what he looked like in his younger days, and this is what he looks like now. Bob Marley was born in 45. So these people are all 79 years old right now. Bob Seger. Steve Martin. Younger days, today. Good looking guy. Mia Farrow. Eric Clapton, great guitar player. Anne Murray, very good singer. Helen Mirren, fine actress. I look at these people and I'm 1 year older. I'm 80. Jacqueline Smith, Charlie's Angels. Remember that TV show, Charlie's Angels? She was one of Charlie's Angels. Henry Winkler, the Fonz. Neil Young, great singer. Goldie Hawn from Laugh-In. Bette Midler. Loved her songs, especially The Rose. The Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, ENIAC, one of the very first general-purpose computers. It took up 1,800 square feet. It was originally designed for military purposes, but unfortunately, they didn't get it built until the war was over in 1945. So this is what computers looked like in the beginning. 1,800 square feet. That'd fill up your whole house. A guy by the name of Perry Spencer invents the microwave oven. Radar range. It was a couple of years before it actually went onto the market and you could buy it. The Slinky is introduced at Gimbel's department store in Philadelphia on November 27th, just in time for Christmas. I don't know about you, but I had one, and I'd put it at the top of the stairs and it would walk all the way down the stairs. Wishbone is introduced. I've had many, many bottles of Wishbone dressing over the years. The very first self-winding watch, the Rolex Oyster Perpetual Datejust, that's quite a name, is introduced. Bet that wasn't cheap. The very first dictation machine, the Gray Autograph, was introduced. Clunky looking thing. Out of 24 million homes, only 10,000 American homes had a TV in 1945. And it sure wasn't much to look at. What is that, about a 8-inch screen maybe, if you're lucky? Okay, so there's only 10,000 TVs. Well, here's catch 22. There was only one TV station in New York City. So unless you lived in New York City, you didn't need to buy a TV. Because if you bought one, there was no station to watch. Remember, there was no cable back then, so you had to be within antenna range. And back then, the antenna was typically little rabbit ears sitting on top. So this is the very unimpressive beginning of television in America. So what were the most popular TV shows? I can pretty much guarantee you and I have never heard of any of these. Dr. Death. It turns out this was just a 4-part series. It only lasted 4 weeks. This is the one I love. Serving Through Science. This was nothing but movies about science things which were developed by the Britannica Encyclopedia. Boy, is that thrilling. I looked for hours. I could not find a single picture or a single image for any of these TV shows. I can find descriptions of what they were, but I probably looked for 4 hours. I couldn't find a single image to show you. People just didn't care. I mean, there only 10,000 people had a TV, so not very many people saw these shows, my friends. But we all had radios, so what were the top radio shows in 1945? When I was 1. Fibber, McGee, and Molly. They were on for a number of years, and they were very popular for a number of years. They were the #1 show in 1945. The Pepsodent Show, starring Bob Hope, was the second most popular radio show that year. Charlie McCarthy Show, The Ventriloquist, a very young-looking Charlie McCarthy here. This is 1945. This is what he looked like back then. It always amazed me that a ventriloquist would be popular on radio. I mean, nobody can see his lips. Nobody can see that he's not moving his lips. They're just listening to his voice. The March of Time, which was a news program that presented dramatized accounts of current events. So they take a news story and make a drama out of it. And this was radio. This was popular. And Bill Stern's Sports Newsreel. This was a sports news broadcast radio show, and it was the 5th most popular radio show in America in 45. So that's what we were listening to. So what were the top musical groups of 1945? The war is now it's over. It's ended in the middle of the year. What was popular? Number one, Swing and Sway with Sammy Kaye and his orchestra. I want you to see a pattern here. Okay, so number one group, an orchestra. Number two, Harry James and his orchestra. So the two most popular musical acts are bands. Number three, Perry Como. Perry was very popular for a number of years. This is what he looked like in 1945. Number four, Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra. Coming in at number four. And number five, Les Brown and his orchestra. So 4 out of the 5 most popular musical acts were bands, big bands. The average annual salary for a man was $1,582 after the war was over. In today's dollars, that would have been a mere $27,262 in today's dollars. That's really low. I think our average salary is somewhere in the $40,000 to $50,000 range today. So people were not making much money back in 1945. A new Ford cost $1,000. In today's, that would be a $17,000 car. A gallon of gas was 20 cents. This was actually expensive. That would be $3.45. I paid well under $3 a couple of days ago. A new home would have cost around $4,600. That's a lot cheaper than today. That's a $79,000 house in today's dollars to build that house. Well, people were still going to the movies, even though there was a war on. What were the top grossing movies? Which movies made the most money? The Bells of St. Mary, starring Bing Crosby and Ingrid Bergman. Over the last 60 days, I have done 25 of these Remember the Year YouTubes. And in each one of those, I always reviewed the top 5 grossing movies. So that's 125 movies that I've talked about. This movie, called Mom and Dad, is without a doubt the most bizarre and strangest top grossing movie I've ever discussed. Mom and Dad is a sexploitation film. Mom and Dad is considered the most successful film within the genre of sex hygiene films, although it faced numerous legal challenges and was condemned by the National Legion of Decency. It became one of the highest grossing films of the 1940s. Mom and Dad tells the story of Joan Blake, a young woman who falls for the pilot, Jack. After being sweet-talked by Jack, she has sex with him. And then Joan requests hygiene books from her mother. These are books that explained all about sex. However, the mother refuses because the daughter's not yet married. Joan later learns that her boyfriend pilot has died in a crash, and she discovers that she is pregnant. The movie then shows movie clips and charts that include graphic nude photographs and movie clips of the female anatomy and movie footage of live childbirths, one natural and one cesarean, and contains pictures portraying syphilis and venereal diseases. The movie Mom and Dad is believed to have had several different endings, although typically it concludes with the birth of the young woman's child. Sometimes the birth is stillborn and the baby is dead, and other times the baby is put up for adoption. Interestingly, audiences were always separated by sex, and only women could attend the 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. movies, and only men were allowed to see the 9 p.m. movie. Mom and Dad. Unbelievable. And this is 1945. Leave Her to Heaven, starring Gene Tierney and Cornell Wilde and Gene Crane. Don't remember this one, but hey, I was only 1 year old. What would I know? My mother certainly wasn't taking me to any movies. The Lost Weekend, starring Ray Milland and Jane Wyman. At least I've heard of these people. Yep, I remember going to movies with them later in life. State Fair, Janet Gaynor. This was interesting. Will Rogers, the famous, I don't know what you call that guy. He just tells stories about America. This was a feel-good movie about a family that goes to the state fair, hence the name. So who won the Oscars in 1945? Here's the 3 top big winners. The Best Picture, Going My Way, starring Bing Crosby. Best Actor, Bing Crosby for Going My Way. And the Best Actress, Ingrid Bergman for the movie Gaslight. This is about a movie where her husband tries to convince her that she's going insane. So what were the top songs of 1945? And by the way, this is an actual photograph of what a jukebox looked like in 1945. Don't you know? Don't Fence Me In, Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters. This was the #1 song in America. Number 2, Doris Day and Les Brown, Sentimental Journey. This has remained popular for decades and decades. People still enjoy this. I'm going to be playing and singing both of these songs, Don't Fence Me In and Sentimental Journey. Number 3 song, Perry Como, Till the End of Time. 3rd most popular song in America. Number 4, Vaughn Monroe and his orchestra, There, I've Sung It Again. I have no memory whatsoever of this song. Number 5, I remember this one, the Andrews Sisters, Rum and Coca-Cola. Snappy, cute little number. And now I'd like to play and sing 2 of the most popular songs in 1945, when I was 1 year old. Don't Fence Me In by Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters. This was written in 1934 by Cole Porter. Roy Rogers sang it in the 1944 movie called Hollywood Canteen. In 1945, the song was sung again as the title tune of another Roy Rogers film, Don't Fence Me In. Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters, with Vic Schoen and his orchestra, recorded it in 1944 without having seen or heard the song. Crosby entered the studio, and within 30 minutes, he and the Andrews Sisters had completed the song. And they walked away, and it sold millions and was the #1 song in 1945. Oh, give me land, lots of land underneath the starry skies. Don't fence me in. Doris Day and the Les Brown Orchestra and the fabulous song Sentimental Journey. It was recorded late in the year, November 20th of 1944. This was Doris Day's very first #1 hit. The song's release coincided with the end of World War II in Europe, and this song sort of became the unofficial homecoming theme for many veterans. It has been recorded over 900 times over the years. Sentimental Journey.
Gonna take a sentimental journey, gonna set my heart at ease. Gonna take a sentimental journey to renew old memories. Got my bag, got my reservation, spent each time I could afford, like a child in wild anticipation, long to hear that all aboard. 7